I know it's been a long day, so I'll try to keep this interesting. There's a little bit of war, there's a little bit of revolution, so hopefully that'll change the pace a little bit. First of all, I'd like to say a big thanks to Jan, to Martina, and the whole team here for putting together this great conference. I work in Ukraine. I'm actually from Poland myself, and I've been in Ukraine for 5 years now, and seeing this conference, I mean, seeing Prague, I visited a couple of times, but it's really, truly amazing to see how things have moved forward here. And I know when I come back to Poland and I talk to people there, you know, you don't realize how much progress has been made. But for somebody who's coming from the East and who sees it with a lapse of time over the years, I think it's truly remarkable. Yesterday, I took a cab ride that the taxi had. I'm not going to say the name of the company because, well, they didn't pay the fee. But there were 5 different, I think 4 iPods, 5 different screens in the taxi. I don't know what their purpose was, but it was really, really impressive to see how high-tech everything has gotten here. And also in terms of internet advertising. I mean, you know, it's really, really impressive how the scene, the media scene has changed. I'm going to talk a little bit about a different world. Now in Ukraine we don't have the same level of, I mean there's no internet advertising conferences of this scale because, well, that's not how the game is being played right now. Before I start, I'd just like to say one thing. I'm not a big fan of in my country stories. You know how you have international conferences and people are talking about some new trends, some new development, and then someone comes along and says, well, in my country, you know, this is how it goes, and then we'll tell something usually quite entertaining, quite strange, but absolutely irrelevant to the conversation. You know, you'll be talking about satellite dishes, someone comes along. In my country, we have, you know, metal-eating birds who eat satellite dishes, so we don't have that technology. Okay, great. So, you know, I'll try to tell the story of what's been going on in Ukraine and how things work on that media market, but at the same time, I'll also try to take some lessons out of it that are not just specific to Ukraine and also can be applied in a wider framework. So that said, I'll now immediately break my own rule and start talking about what the situation is there. To give you a few words of introduction about our company, it's the KyivPost. It's been on the market for 19 years now. It's in English language. I think it's one of the, it has been over the years one of the few independent publications in Ukraine, so that's what made us feel special about ourselves. And it's you know, it's been a roller coaster of a ride during all these years. It's not a huge publication, but basically what makes our model work is that we've always had a lot of international correspondents come in. Ukraine is kind of a mid-sized country. It's not important enough like Moscow to always have a full-time person stationed there, but there's always some stories coming out of it. And so we've always had this kind of international level of journalism because of correspondents who would come, would do a story for their, you know, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, the Economist. They'll do a story once a week, twice a month, and then the rest of the times they would work at the KyivPost. So we had this combination of a local presence with an international standards, international focus of the journalism. So in a sense, it's not only in a very unusual country to do business in, Ukraine, it's also a very unusual publication. And I mean, what's relevant here for the discussion today is what we've been doing over the past year or so, because we've moved away from the traditional business model. And just a word, I'm responsible. I used to work as a journalist. Now I'm responsible for the commercial side, so not editor-in-chief anymore. So anyways, what we've been doing over the past year, we've introduced a paywall. We're the only media outlet in Ukraine to have a paywall. We've introduced a new series of services. We've redefined the business model in a way that's very unique in Ukraine. And actually, it's been successful. So that's kind of why I'm talking to all of you today, is to confront that versus what's happening in terms of online advertising and how that's changing the media market. So to start off, I will say a few words about what it's like in general in Ukraine and what it's been like over the past couple of months. I'm sure you've been following the news at least a little bit. It's exciting times for journalism, but it's not necessarily the best for media management. As you can imagine, marketing budgets, well, they don't like revolution, they don't like war, so it's not exactly the easiest of times. But that said, the problems, the difficulties of working there are not new. I know that probably most of you don't need it pointed out, but just in case we have a more international crowd, Ukraine is circled over there. It's in red, which means that according to Reporters Without Borders, we have a difficult situation reporting in the country. There's a bunch of difficulties that are associated with working in a country like Ukraine. A lot of the times when people come from, authoritative, semi-dictatorships or whatnot, you think that, it's just like you publish a story critical of the government and boom, the reporter lands in jail. Of course, that happens, but that's not the real problem. The real way that these difficulties work is much more sophisticated, and censorship works in much more sophisticated ways, and the difficulties are much more complex than you would imagine at first glance. So the first of the problems with the media market is, of course, the oligarch-dominated media market. So what does that mean? That means that all the TV stations, almost all of the radios, are controlled by essentially 5 guys. That's not exactly the best situation. The government, up until the end of the revolution now, and the former president having to flee the country, or strategically to retreat out of the country into Russia, the government was one of the oligarchic groups that was controlling the media. The problem here, and with this, is sort of twofold. So on the first side, we have the kind of more direct problems. So what we saw last year, it was a very interesting story. Forbes Ukraine, they bought the license from the international Forbes, built a great, really fantastic publication, very different from what we have Forbes in let's say, Central Europe. Lots of investigative stories, lots of very interesting stories about, who is doing business with whom, where the money is coming from, really great work. And so one of their journalists gets a letter one day, very kind of James Bond story. She gets a name, a photo, and the words, investigate this guy. Okay. And an address. I think the first address was in Crimea, the next one was in Kharkiv. So she digs, and she finds out there's this guy. Nobody knows about him. He's 27 years old, and he's controlling the liquid petroleum market. Amazing. How is it that somebody that nobody knows about is controlling essentially the liquid petroleum market, the gas market, is a major trader in everything, and nobody has heard about him. So she, after months of work, she publishes a story called The Gas King of All Ukraine. Okay, and now the world has been introduced to Mr. Serhiy Kurchenko, multimillionaire at the age of 27. Okay. 6 months later, after Mr. Kurchenko has bought the third biggest football club in the country, after he has bought all these huge companies around the country, the refinery from Lukoil, assets all over the place, he decides to buy the media holding with Forbes. Okay, you know, $400 million. And the journalist is out. So that's pretty direct control right there. I feel comfortable talking about this now because Mr. Kurchenko has been reported as hiding in a Moscow nightclub recently, and there's an arrest warrant against him, so I don't think I will meet him in Ukraine anymore. Anyways, so this is a direct form of censorship. We had this group, it was called The Family, people around the president who were buying up media assets left and right and taking control of the market this way. This is, of course, a fairly serious problem. The bigger problem, in a way, is that when you have people who use media as press services, you don't have a market. And here is where we have something that is a problem, I think, not just in Ukraine, it's all over the place. I mean, you cannot have a free media, you cannot have a well-functioning, vibrant media that serves the social role that it is supposed to serve unless you have a profitable media, unless you have a market that works. Without this, as long as everyone is unprofitable, and whether they're chasing political donations or whether they're chasing grants or whether they're dependent on one or two really big advertisers, the system doesn't work the way it should. Now, why the situation is not as bad in Ukraine as it is in other countries, and why the whole Euromaidan revolution was possible, and the media played, of course, a really huge, really important role in all of this. Was because you had something called competitive authoritarianism. So you did not have one source of power, you had multiple sources of power. And so you had lots of different players on the field who were competing against each other. And so it was not in their interest to destroy all the sources of information. I mean, if one guy had a fight with another, he would leak documents, spread information. And so because of this competition, because of this sort of chaos, we had freedom that slipped through the cracks. And it was especially present in the online sphere. And thanks to this, we had the seeds that ultimately led to the revolution that were, in any case, very important and conducive in getting to the revolution in Ukraine. By the way, just a short personal anecdote on our situation as the KyivPost. In 2011, we had a conflict with the nice bearded guy on the left there, Mr. Firtash, who said that we had libeled him and took us to court in London because he is a donor of Cambridge University. So we supposedly sullied his name there. The case was thrown out as, and I quote, almost an abuse of the process. So we were very happy about that, even though it was quite expensive in terms of legal fees. And Mr. Firtash is now in Vienna awaiting extradition to the US on an FBI arrest warrant. So the kind of interesting world that we operate in. Okay, so in more recent terms, we've not only had this problem with the oligarch-dominated market, we've also had the revolution. By the way, the photos are not great quality, but they're personal photos, so I thought it had a more personal touch. So this causes quite significant problems. When I took over the commercial part of the operation, I never expected to get a call on a Sunday afternoon from our chief editor saying that we need gas masks and bulletproof vests right now because the journalists, the photographers are refusing to go out on the street. So this was quite a serious problem for us in terms of we're a small publication, around 30 people, 28, 12 commercial staff, 16 reporters. And all of a sudden, we've had all these huge costs. So one of the big helps here has been from the European Endowment for Democracy. They helped cover expenses for us, so that should be taken also into consideration when I talk about the rest of the model. But that said, these are acute not long-term costs that we were facing. Some very nice guys who peacekeepers and the opposition, NATO trained supposedly in the Czech Republic also, I think. So I don't know if you've been following that, but and so here's the scariest thing of all, yeah. And this is what has been the biggest problem for us and what has been the biggest problem for media all over the world, but especially so in East Ukraine. Now, these are numbers from the US. Unfortunately, in Ukraine, we don't have that reliable statistics, but I think this really goes to the heart of what the problem is in the media in the world today. And that's not just that we've had a collapse in terms of print advertising, which is a fundamental source, which was a fundamental source of revenue for all media. For us, it was around 70 to 80% a couple of years ago. I mean, you know, the most important, bar none. And so there's two issues here. One is that obviously you have a collapse of the traditional revenue system, the traditional revenue model. And you have another problem, which is that, as you can see, in the media, the best of times came before the worst of times. Why does that matter? When you look at traditional media organizations, they were stuck, and they are still suffering from it, with huge legacy costs. You know, if you look at the way journalism contracts were made in the US, let's say in the mid-2000s, you had people who, okay, these are unique examples, but there were quite a few of them. You had people who got contracts for $100,000 a year and who were obliged to write 6 stories at the Atlantic. That happened. And you had overinflated salaries, overinflated costs. I mean, this is a pretty interesting industry to invest in. I mean, you look, this kind of growth, that's great. But then collapse. And so these huge legacy costs, they are extremely troubling, and that's why also this is something that's very good for the new online media that are appearing now, that it's easier, it's cheaper to build than it is to transform a media organization. Now, what happened to us, to the KyivPost, was that in Ukraine, I'm sure in the Czech Republic it's also something like that, that you see what's happening in America and then you have a couple of years extra time before the trend hits here. So that's something that's very useful to get this warning of what's going to be happening. Now, unfortunately, my predecessors managing the company looked at this and thought that it would never hit Ukraine. It did. In 2009, our revenues dropped 60%. There was the financial crisis, devaluation, everything happened bad at the same time. We cut staff, we were struggling for many years. The story has a happy ending because now we have a sustainable system, but I'll come to that later. So anyway, it was very tough times. So what do you do when you have such tough times? You innovate. Here's a photo from the Maidan. When they were stuck with the barricades, what they did was to build a catapult. By the way, for people who are looking for good engineers, I mean, the fact that guys on the street are able to build a catapult in several hours, I would say investing in Ukraine could be an interesting option. I don't know how many West European countries still have that kind of solid scientific engineering education that the people on the street are able to do something like that. By the way, the catapult, for those who like anecdotal social media stories, the catapult had still has an extremely good Twitter feed. It was really one of the best informed and one of the most comical Twitter feeds during the whole revolution. It lives on until this day. Unfortunately, the catapult itself, the first one was captured by the police and dismantled, although the second one survived, and I'm not following the story too closely, but I think it's going to a museum, so it didn't turn out too bad. So, building a new model, yeah? What we kind of saw, and this is a guy building barricades at 4 o'clock in the morning, I think. You know, sort of, we got this huge hit in terms of revenues, and we sat back and we thought, okay, what's the problem? And I think the problem here is something that can be extrapolated to the experience of any media in any country. When you look at historically, I mean, media, there have been quite a few models that worked, but in essence, I mean, the media was playing a sort of social role. I mean, we all know these, we've seen the stories about how a community is around 200 people, and after that you need alternative forms of communication, alternative social models, because you know, to make the communication work and everything. That's why they say that communism works up to 200 people, because you can know all of them personally, and after that it fails. I don't know, no comments on that. But when you look at the way the media was functioning you know, in let's say pre-First World War America, or even after that, it was working as the thing that was bringing the whole town together. This was the instrument of communication, and it wasn't just the printed thing that we can still find until this day. It wasn't just the piece of paper, or later the radio emission, or later the TV. It was also the people. The journalists were playing a role of connecting the community together. If somebody had to get something done to get the message across, okay, it wasn't always good, but also, you know, in communication with the politicians or whatever local businesses there were. I mean, the media was fundamental in playing a certain role. And I think that we have lost that role in a certain way. A lot of the media nowadays we see, and I'm not commenting on what the situation is in the Czech Republic because I don't know, but looking at international or also from Polish or Ukrainian experience, you have a lot of the thing that somebody writes one thing and then everybody copies it, and then it's just, there's nothing really that distinguishes the media between itself. I mean, they don't have a community. Everyone is competing for everyone. Of course, you have niche publications, professional publications. That's a different kind of story, and I'll get to that later. Why I think they have the best chance of survival. But what has happened is that the media has lost its role in the community, in my opinion, and you know, and this goes on a marketing level. I think it also works. When you put it into the vertical versus lateral marketing framework. You know, to briefly go over this, I mean, vertical is when you cut up the market into different sections and you say, like, our position is here, we do it this way, and you cut up the market into smaller and smaller sections, and as more competitors enter, the smaller sections, they hit this point where it's not really profitable, where everyone is just overworked and they're using excess capital just to get by, and nobody is really operating on a sustainable level. And lateral is about building new markets and at distinguishing them from other ones. The easiest example here is cereals, to my mind. I mean, you know, cereals, typical breakfast food. Vertical description of the market is, I like cereals with strawberries, with raisins, with some, I don't know, some tropical fruit. And you cut up the market into this way. Okay, that's one way. The lateral marketing is to say, okay, cereals are something that people like to consume because of whatever. They have a preference because it works well for their digestion. They like it for breakfast. But it doesn't have to be in a bowl with milk or the traditional way. Let's turn it into a bar. Let's make it into a cereal bar. Okay, you've built a new market. Now you have the cereal bar market. And I think the same thing has happened in the media, except that we've all become cereal bars. Not you, but I mean, all of the publications, they really resemble each other. If you look at the international ones, now everyone takes the main information from the wires, adds a little bit of their own flavor, and that's it. And the market has been cut up. There's too many competitors, and there's too many. There's not enough identification with the needs of the readers, and this is the next point, is that when you transform the media into something that responds to the needs of a specific community, then you're able to build a new market. You're able to define a new market for yourself. So, and the last point, I know it might be not the right crowd for this, but I don't think it's all about technology. Technology is very, very important in the media, but it's not everything. You know, online is definitely the future of the media. I have no, I wish I had more money to invest in it. I wish I had more time and more specialists to go after developing our online strategy, and I think that it's absolutely critical to the paper's development, but that's not everything. You know, often we hear that, you know, young people, they don't consume print anymore. Young people do this, young people do that. Well, sorry to break it to you. We're in Europe. Young people don't read so much, and there's not so many young people. Sorry. So you have to look at what's about other things as well that are important. So what we did. Our readers, they're not young. They're mainly business readers, diplomats, academic community specialists. It's 50-50, Ukrainian versus international. Around 40,000 people in Kyiv. Then online right now, because of the revolution, we're around 2 million hits weekly, but before that we were talking 200, 400,000. It's a small community, but it's one that's fairly affluent. And so, what was the point? What could we do with this? The first thing that we did is we started organizing conferences. I mean, the media as something that brings people together. We knew a lot of our readers personally. We knew a lot of our community personally. And so we, since they all worked in big corporations, we told them to sponsor our events, sponsor cool get-togethers so that they can all come together and have a nice cocktail and talk to each other and pay us for it. And you know what? It worked really well, actually. We had the luck of being unique on the Ukrainian market, so we managed to get some high-level political speakers, Saakashvili from Georgia. We had some guys from Europe as well coming in for our events. This helped a lot in terms of promotion and visibility, but it was mostly about bringing the people together. And that turned out to be very important for us. Right now, when we look at it last year, I mean, this was around 15–20% of revenue. That's definitely significant. And actually, it was supposed to grow this year. Yeah, unfortunately, I don't see that happening for the time being. One of our conferences was supposed to be on February 19, so in the middle of the final attack of the revolution. Next one was supposed to be when Crimea was annexed. Okay, don't get me started on that. Hopefully, after September, after all of this calms down, we'll come back to it. But anyway, this was something that was growing very well. Next, I'll skip the everyday life part, actually. I'll get to that later. Next thing we did was subscriptions. First people in Ukraine, we introduced the Paywall. Since, as we saw, that was an oligarch-dominated market, nobody really cared about the Paywall. What they wanted was power, so what they wanted was more reach. So this went against their interest. But we introduced it, and I'll get to the results later, but it was okay. Next, it's making premium products, products that are specifically defined for your target audience. One thing that we were looking at doing, the project's been delayed a little bit, is doing premium analysis. And not a lot of our readers are business readers, and providing essentially taking on the think tank functions, but in a way that's suited to our community of readers. That's something that, since we know them, since we know their needs very well, we can provide them with the kind of analysis with daily updates on what really matters to their information. And for those who use the Economist Intelligence Unit, I mean, it's great, but it's something for a global community of readers. I think they've created an amazing product. Our idea was to do the same thing on a local level. In Poland, that's being done by Polityka, political/economic magazine /social/historic. It's a little bit everything. But they're making this thing. It's called Polityka Insight. Also, very interesting special analysis made for the kind of readers that need a more in-depth, a more high-quality product. I'll get to the everyday life part later. So, about the paywall. You know, it has several advantages. It's very difficult to convince people that they need to pay for something that they got free for a very long time. But at the end of the day, I mean, when you pay for something, this should be an indication of quality. I know the example isn't perfect, but imagine that somebody is distributing candy on the street in a van, yeah? You don't really feel like going and eating that candy. But the biggest newspaper in Ukraine is distributed for free, largely without advertising, outside of the metro. I'm sure that in many other countries, such a model, I mean, I've seen it everywhere. You have the tabloid version, like the metro kind of paper that people distribute. It has lots of advertising, nothing really interesting. It works on a business level. But when you look at this more broadly for the media framework, I mean, it's a question of education, it's a question of marketing, to make people understand that the media is always going to be obligated to the people who fund it. Whether that's your 3 big advertisers that account for 60% revenue, whether it's the political party that gives you, I don't know, advertising or just envelopes or whatever it is to fund your media organization. You know, whoever is giving you that money will create, even if they say nothing, there will be self-censorship, there will be something that damages the product. If the reader is the person who funds you, then they are the owner. They are the person for whom the product is made. If it's not the advertisers, it's not the political party, it's them. And that's why we've seen over the past couple of years a lot of interesting projects pop up like that. In France, you have Mediapart, which is working on a subscription basis. In Ukraine, there are some which are working on a subscription/donation basis. It's not really a paywall, but it's also bringing the money in from the reader. With us, it's a paywall. First 24 hours are free. It's a rule we instituted during the revolution because if somebody needed to know that on the street, just on the other street, there's fights or some explosions, you know, we need to give them that information. But if they want to use it on a longer level, then they pay for and you know, it worked. And it can be used as a positioning tool. If you manage, I believe it, because we managed to do it, but if you manage to convince your community of readers, and here's why we come back to the community, that this is a product for them, this is not just a media product, this is something that they can identify with, then it can be used as a positioning tool. You position yourself as the people who serve your readers on the market. And you know what? I think that ironically, maybe, you know, I hear this a lot in Poland, here as well, and around the region that, okay, we're not all writing in English, so it's more difficult to convince the people. We have smaller communities. I think that's not true. I think the smaller the community, the more unique characteristics it has, the easier it will be to convince them that this is our product, that the group of journalists are making it for you, and that this is something that you can identify with. So what's our experience with the paywall? Well, at first we had a 1/3 dip in traffic, of course. It's actually not tragic when you look at some of the publications, I know. some colleagues in Poland got hit by 90% within 2 weeks and just said, okay, we can't do it. So we were lucky in that sense. We instituted it a little bit over a year ago. Now it's 20% of revenue. That's very significant. Taking that plus the community stuff, plus the conferences, plus our special products, we're almost at half of, at 50% of revenue. And despite all the conflict and everything, we're operating on a basically break-even basis now. So I would say this has been a very positive experience. This is something, if you're considering it, I think it's something that has to be well planned. It's not easy, but certainly our experience has been good in that. Now I'll go back, and I'm almost finished. I know the time is over, and I know everyone is really tired and eager to get to the drinking/networking part. But making making media a part of everyday life. So in my hometown of Gdańsk, in the north of Poland, we have the national newspapers that have local units, and we have also a local one. And this goes against the technology part, but they have created something that is truly amazing. For every part of your everyday life, what you do, if you're somebody from Gdańsk metropolitan area, you go to the website, trójmiasto.pl. And you know, when I wanted to find a bike to rent or to buy, I went there. When I wanted to rent an apartment, I went there. When I was looking to buy an apartment, I went there. People who have, it's a port, so people who have shipping containers coming in, they go there and they can see them tracking. If you're investing in local companies, you can see how they're doing it. They have a staff of 80 people, 40 of them are IT. 20 journalists, 20 administrative commercial staff, 40 IT. Everything you want, you get there. You have a map, you're looking for the ATM that's across the street, you go there. They've made it into something that is identifiable with local life. And if you look at it on a macro international level, I think the fact that Warren Buffett was buying up local media over the past couple of years is a good indication that there's something there. So when you find the local community that you serve, all of a sudden you can change the product in such a way that you're playing a different game. Back to the lateral versus vertical. You're not competing on the general market. You have your own market. Okay, now to the final part. Well, look, my experience from 5 years in Ukraine, most of it in the media, is that media can serve free goals. And it's very important to understand what your priority is and, you know, abstracting from any moral, ethical, political issues, you have to understand, if you want to be effective in what you're doing, you have to figure out what is the goal of the media. I believe that you can only meet one priority and then half a priority. You cannot do 100% on all of them. The first one is power. So what we see with the oligarchs. What you want there is reach. You don't care about costs. You want to reach as many people as possible, and the media organization becomes the press service of the holding in which it is. That's not a great thing. I'm not a big fan of that situation, but let's be honest, that there's a lot of media that also operate like that. There's prestige. If you have highbrow or high-quality content, that's something, you know, usually when you look at academic or / political publications, that's something that plays a role there. People are proud to be writing for a publication, and so they're willing to settle for a lower salary. I mean, The Atlantic was notorious. There was sort of a scandal internationally. They were not paying journalists. It was free to contribute to The Atlantic because they had such a great name that they didn't feel that it was necessary to pay. Okay, that's a model. The third one is money. If you want it to be, and here just one distinction, if you want it to, there's sustainable and there's profitable. You can make a prestigious publication sustainable financially. You can make a power-oriented organization sustainable financially, but it will not be a profit-generating. So you have to look at it differently from a commercial point of view. So here we're talking about two basic ideas. One is that you have a premium product that you can sell. And here, if it's a professional publication, if it's business, if it's something like that, usually it works, and this is the easiest issue to solve, I think. You can charge subscriptions, you can solve that problem easily, or you have massive volume. Right now, during the revolution in Ukraine, one of the best publications from the international ones was BuzzFeed. Who would have expected that a couple of years ago, that BuzzFeed would have invested so much into foreign reporting? Right now they have the former correspondent of The Guardian from Moscow. They have AP writer from Moscow who was doing the on-the-ground reporting. And they were doing really excellent stuff. But that's because of the massive volume. If you have 20 low-paid interns that are writing stories about cats, you can afford one excellent, experienced journalist who will dig into the financial offshore schemes used by, some business groups to manipulate politicians. Okay, but that's something that's specific to the mass volume. And so I think the same way that you have to find, to make a media organization effective, you have to find out what your priority is, what's your second priority, the one that you will reach halfway, and then you have to identify what the community is. And this is the key to success. But I think over the next couple of years, the collapse that we saw in the media market will be over, and we'll see a new generation. We already have it here, but a new generation of media that will grow. Others will transform, will adapt, and ultimately we'll have a new media market. I also hope that it will be a free and vibrant media market that will help our societies. But well, that's more difficult. So on that optimistic note, I would like to thank you for your attention. And that's one of our journalists right now in the east of Ukraine. That photo is from Kyiv, but reporting there. So thank you for your attention. And once again, thank you for the organizers for this really great event. And I hand over.
Thank you, Mr. Parusinski.
Okay.